Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask the Experts here on City News 570. Tracy Valko is the founder and chief visionary officer of Valko Financial. With over 25 years of experience in the mortgage and financial industry, she's a trusted source of information, someone who knows what she's talking about, and she's always willing to give us some of her time, and she's joining us here again today. Thanks so much for coming back, Tracy.
Well, thank you, Brock.
Listeners, if you'd like more information about the topics discussed on the show today, you can start your journey at tracyvalko.ca. You can call Tracy directly, 519-745-8019, or email her, tracy@valkofinancial.ca. Tracy, April is quickly wrapping up. Lots of lawn signs for open houses and sales and rentals and all of those kinds of things. If we take a look at the most recent numbers for the region, what do you see when it comes to housing?
Well, it's actually quite interesting in March. Typically, when you look at it historically in the housing market, March usually is our spring market.
Right.
And I think that this year looks a little bit different. A lot of it has to attribute to interest rates. We thought that bank prime was going to come down in January, February. Let's face it, we thought it was in March. And, that's not the case. So I think that we're such a country based on interest rate. We're so sensitive to that rate and qualification spectrum that I think that it's, delaying people selling their homes or forcing them to sell because rates are still higher in some cases. And people are getting pushed to wait a bit, right, to sell. Having said that, I do think that we're starting to see more activity than we did last year. And when you look at the KW housing stats from a sales perspective in March, when you look at every aspect of detached to townhouses to condominiums and semi-detached, they all declined in terms of sales activity. Okay. However, on the opposite of that is price point. We saw each price point of each demographic of housing increase. Okay. So they all went up. So looking at it from a detached home, it went up 4.9% from this time last year. And for everyone, townhouse, condominium, right, and semi-detached. So what does that tell us? That tells us there's still not a lot of supply out there. Houses are going over and above list price because there is still such a pent-up demand, and it's the amount of population growth to the lack of supply that we've seen over the last few years. So no matter what the market condition is, I think we're still going to see values go up modestly because we just don't have the supply. Now, I do think that when we start to see rates come down, we'll start to see that shift very quickly.
Okay.
And we've seen that in periods of time where it could be even a day. I've seen it, right? Where we've seen that momentum build up. So, that's interesting. When we look at it in terms of actual days to list, so from the time that's listed to the time that it's sold, we're looking at, that increasing to 19 days now. Okay, from 18. And month supply, it's about 1.9, almost 2 months supply out there in the market, which has increased from what we traditionally saw. 2 years ago, we weren't even a month. We were under a month. So we've got more supply, though, in different sectors. So they've actually broke it down where when you're looking at condominiums, we've got 3.6% supply. Okay. So we definitely have more condominiums out there, and I think that's because a lot of investors bought condominiums in that very busy market, and a lot of investors are offloading them right now because of interest rates, probably not receiving enough rent to be able to cover their mortgage payment costs. So I still think we're seeing a bit of a shift out there, but the momentum is picking up in the housing market. It's slow, but it's definitely picking up.
And it seems to be, in some ways, it's that sort of hurry up and wait. People are maybe getting into that idea of buying a home or selling, and depending on where they're at. Yeah. But they're looking and thinking, the interest rate or the rate hasn't changed again. They keep saying, well, maybe the next change, maybe it's going to be June, maybe it's and I think maybe there's that idea of, I'm just going to hang on a little bit longer and just see if those rates start to change.
Yeah. And I mean, the conversation is there, and the forecast is, and we'll talk about that, rates are coming down. There's no doubt, it's just time, right? I think from the government's perspective, they want to see inflation consistently trending down to closer to that 2%, or even staying where it's at to some extent, so that we're not over 3%. That's a huge conversation that we're seeing the Minister of Finance have. And I think that that's what's delaying interest rates coming down. Even on the fixed side, we're seeing that a bit slower than where we thought. But the forecast is from all economic experts, market forecasters, we are going to see bank prime come down, we're going to see fixed rates come down. And it's very interesting because CMHC, which is a very conservative government body, which is our mortgage insurer, our default insurance. So when you're buying a home with less than 20%, it has to go through CMHC. Yeah. Their market forecast, and they said, is that we should see values of homes increase by 2026 that could potentially be at the same levels that we saw in 2022.
Oh boy, right.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because values went up like 20% in some areas. So even if we take that conservatively at 10%, that's still a significant increase.
For sure.
And
for sure.
I think that that is realistic to where we're going to see, because interest rates drive the housing market.
That's right. And people might be looking for that sort of sweet spot, right? They see that the interest rates are coming down. You know, the idea that the value of the home might be going up as well too. I don't want to say it's a gamble, but it's a game where you need to be paying attention to all of the pieces before you make any huge decisions.
And I think it's not just about knowing what you qualify for, but it's also understanding the market, knowing when your opportunity to buy, understanding where rates are going, understanding inflation. I mean, it's a whole spectrum of what you need to have to navigate. That's why I always say, and I'm so passionate about making sure you have your professional team that's really supporting you, from real estate to mortgages to the legal side of it, right? Your accounting, right? So having all of these professionals there that you've already, had conversation and consultation on, so you know where you're going, because you need to know where you are today to know where you're going to go tomorrow. And because the market's so sensitive now to fluctuations and changes, I think that opportunity can be limited to some people if you aren't actually doing your homework and understanding where you're at.
And those are we've talked about that for the last couple of years. Like, you do need to make sure that you're doing your homework. You go to the experts, but do your homework in the meantime as well. So when it comes to inflation, it sounds like there's some good news on the horizon. In your mind, what's always having the biggest impact on inflation?
Well, I mean, when you look at it, and I've got a graph here, which I could actually show this on the radio, but I'll describe it. Sure. So the biggest impact on inflation is mortgage interest and rent inflation. There's no doubt. If you actually take out rent and shelter costs, so mortgage and mortgage interest, actually here in Ontario, so it's actually broken down by province, but here in Ontario, our inflation is actually sitting at 1.1.
Okay.
Now, we have to keep in mind the target rate in Canada for inflation to be where we're actually functioning properly. They say normally, I guess, in our economy is 2%. 2%. So we're well under that.
Right.
So we can say, well, why is that happening? Well, the government increased monetary policy, which is increase the bank prime rate to help slow down the market from the housing frenzy we had and people spending. They knew that this was very inflationary. So this is why we saw 2 years of rate hikes. So we could say, well, why don't they strip it away just like that? Well, we know what even 0.25% has done, and they've decreased it last year, the amount of housing activity. But a lot of that is a result of mismanagement by the government of how many people have come into this country to not the amount of housing that was needed. Right? So we're behind the 8th ball in housing. So I think that frenzy of housing activity is always going to be there, and especially very sensitive to rates. But when you look at it from an inflation perspective, in Canada, so if you look at the median in Canada, stripping out mortgage interest and shelter costs, we're actually at 1.3. So we're very close to target. I think that this is why the government is getting pressured by a lot of the banks now, lobbying and putting it in the news that, okay, it's time now, you got to start decreasing bank prime. So the forecast is, from most market experts, is that we won't see it in June.
Okay.
We'll see it in July.
Right.
I mean, there's still, when you look at it from a percentage perspective, there's still about a 64% right now chance this week, and that could change next week, that the market's saying we could see that 0.25% in June. But I'm going to be more on I say optimistic because I think rates coming down is optimistic. I'm going to say it's going to be July.
Okay.
And then by the end of the year, in total, we should have about a 75 basis point reduction in bank prime. So that is a change from last time, because we thought we would see a full percent. I think we'll see, 0.75% decrease in bank prime. And that will also help with fixed rates coming down as well, right? We'll start seeing that, those rates down. I think that you'll see more of a decrease in bank prime and fixed rates in 2025. Why do I feel that? Well, I think that we're going to be consistently down to that target rate of headline inflation at 2%. Core inflation is coming down. That's under 3%, which is great. And this is what the government's really looking at is core inflation. I think we might have a little bit of hiccups because of gas.
Right. And coming into summer, we see these things happening. But in your mind, Tracy's saying cautious optimism. I'm not putting words in your mouth. No.
Cautiously optimistic.
I like it. After the show today, if you'd like more information about the topics discussed on the show, you can start your journey at tracyvalko.ca. You can also call Tracy directly, 519-745-8019, or you can email her, tracy@valkofinancial.ca. So before the break, Tracy, we were talking about what the government has decided to do, and sometimes it's like we're trying to look into a crystal ball. In your mind, where bank prime is right now, what do you see happening, maybe even taking a look at the next 6 months as we ride out the rest of 2024, what's going to be happening?
Well, I think that definitely the expectation of where bank prime is going to be is different than where we were last time. When I came on here.
Yeah.
We've got 5 announcements till the end of the year, which is not very long if you sit and think about it. And I think that we'll see June 5th. We won't see a change, but I think that between July, September, October, and December, we should have a 0.25% drop on 3 of those 4 announcements.
Okay.
So when you look at it from how does that affect your payment, well, it's about $15 reduction on every $100,000 that you owe.
Right.
So on an average mortgage amount, which is about $600,000 here in Ontario, you're looking at about $270 reduction if you're in a variable rate, adjustable rate mortgage, right? So, I mean, that's great news, right?
Yeah.
That any savings,
Some breathing room
is going to help people.
Yeah.
But this could change depending on how inflation is sticky, and I think that, given the, I think some of the challenges that we're seeing in oil prices, and a lot of that is obviously a global issue and concern, and they're talking about refineries not having their equipment adjusted to be able to help with the demand of the global market. I question why that hasn't been put into place. I mean, they're very savvy companies, but this is a communication that's given to us, so we have to deal with the information we have.
Yeah.
So I think, there people would say, why is oil prices so important in inflation? Well, it's a large percentage of what our inflation is made up of. Having said that, the most percentage is mortgage interest and shelter costs. So as that comes down with rates coming down, we'll start to see that movement, and we are starting to see inflation come down. But I think that it's important to note that when you look at it from a global perspective on inflation, and especially the Bank of Canada and how it monitors monetary policy and where bank prime is, we're one of the most restricted countries out of the G7.
Right.
And actually, National Bank had an article that indicated that from an economic overview, when you look at it from the Bank of Canada, they actually will wait 6 to 8 quarters before they actually will make any adjustments to bank prime or any future forecasts, because they really want to understand economically what influence that has impacted on our market. So that really does influence us on a burden perspective for Canadians. And we see it in our pocketbooks. We see how expensive things are. So I think that we're a very conservative country. It can work to our advantage sometimes. I think it can work to our disadvantage when we're hurting a lot of people that are very, paying their bills month to month. And we're seeing more people getting pushed from that middle class to, to just surviving because we're so taxed, right? And so I think that this government's going to be pushed to make changes. We've got an election coming in 2025, and we're going to see, which we saw in our federal budget, which we'll chat a bit about, some changes to, help to some extent, but also impact a lot of people on their taxes, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting times.
And you bring up that key point of, it hits you in the pocketbook all the time, and we want to know whether or not we've got a little bit more breathing room coming along. And I know that we've talked about this in the past as well too. Let's say someone's mortgage is coming due, and we've been sitting at interest rates for a fairly lengthy time and fairly steady. If they need to renew, is it still in their best interest right now to renew for a shorter term at a fixed rate, take a year, take 2 years, and kind of give the market a chance to kind of sort itself out a little bit more?
Well, it's an interesting time if you're coming up for renewal. Being proactive and making sure that you're looking at your renewal even more than 12 months in advance.
Right.
You really need to understand where you're at with your payments today. It's going to get better. Interest rates are going to be down next year. But if you're coming up for renewal now, it's going to be a payment shock from where you were coming potentially 5 years ago.
Right.
We were sitting at rates at like 2.84%, 2.54 in some cases on a fixed rate, and you're going to interest rates that are hovering between 5 and 5.5, right? So it's a big adjustment on your mortgage balance and your payments. Having said that, I think that we've worked out a lot of solutions for people. And this is where we really need to sit down. Your financing is different from everyone else. Everyone's bank account is different from the next person. So having conversation with people saying, well, I got this is what you need to do, it is not something that you can compare to your own situation. That's why it's really important to speak to a mortgage professional to see where you're at with your income, where you're at with your credit, where you're at with outstanding debt, where you're at with your mortgage balance, and what can your budget allow. Because what we can recommend you take, and I'm a big proponent right now of variable because I know rates are coming down, but it's a hard one for people to understand because it's such a high rate right now. Even though you do get discounts, it just puts you in the driver's seat when you need to lock in because we're going to be in that reduction rate environment, right? But some people can't afford it in terms of qualifying on that variable rate, or they can't afford the mortgage payment right now. So if that's the case, or if clients are like, you know what, it's too much for me, I'm just not open to that optimism of where the government's going on rates, then doing a shorter term between 1 and 3 is I'm seeing the most popular out there. Where rates are today, we know they're going to be lower next year and definitely into 2026. So making sure people maximize the most on saving thousands of dollars on interest on their mortgage, especially this renewal, is going to be very important, right? So that people know where they're going to go. Because one thing is values are going to trend up. CMHC's told us that. A lot of the actual real estate boards have said that as well. So you're going to gain natural savings with equity, right? And values, appreciating, which is great. But let's make sure that we're also helping you win on your rate, right? And I think that that's a great thing. And I think that one thing people should realize in this environment too is if you are buying, there's huge opportunity. So, looking back in March of 2022, which was a very robust and busy environment for housing, interest rates were sitting around 3.09%. If I look at it today, and you're putting down less than 20% down, rates are sitting at 4.89. So that's a big difference on a rate. However, your purchase price is about $150,000 less because values have come down. Your mortgage amount is about $150,000 less. And therefore, when I look at it from a payment perspective, your payment is actually $300, reduced on a monthly basis. So when people actually see those physical, tangible stats and understand where we're at today, then they can see, oh, here's my opportunity to buy in a market where we're seeing more listings come up. And it's a time where you can still negotiate on price point. You can put conditions of financing in, housing inspection. We're going to start seeing that slowly, dissipate as we're going to see the market get busier with rates coming down. So there's opportunities in the lens that you look at it. And that's why it's really important to speak to a mortgage professional, whether you're coming up for renewal, whether you're buying, to see what is the best advantage strategy for you during these times.
And really, you need to, it's like you're playing with the numbers. You're saying, okay, here's the value of the home right now. If we were to purchase it right now, compared to, if the price is going up, the rates are going down, sit down, spend some time, get your homework done, and look at these things. And we've talked a lot about in the past about people, kind of hanging on the sidelines, but you do at some point you gotta make that jump and get yourself into the market and make those things happen. This time of year, and we talked a bit about this at the beginning, spring always tends to be that busy time of year for buying and selling. Are you expecting the same thing? Do you think we're going to still see that happening through May and June, or is it still going to be that cautious sort of approach to housing in the next couple of months?
We're starting to see it now. I mean, the market is getting busier this month in April, and I do think we'll have a much busier spring market than it was last year in 2023.
Right.
But I think our spring market will be elongated this year. So I think we'll have cycles of it.
Okay.
Especially if Bank Prime comes down in July, we're going to have a very busy, I'd say, or probably even a more of a robust spring market come September. And then we're going to be consistently busy in that housing market for 2025. So there'll be a little bit of a slowdown, but the momentum's picking up. I'm seeing a lot of people looking at different options of buying a home right now where, going back out to the outskirts of city areas, more land, being able to bring more of their families together under, one parcel of land, because they know it's challenging for their children, or maybe they've got cousins and they want to bring everyone together, and what does that look like? Is it tiny homes on parcels of land? Is it, I have a lot of people right now that renovations are starting to pick up where, their parents are in retirement ages where they cannot be living at home, so they're adding additions onto their property so that they can have their parents close, because as we know, the hospitals can't handle a lot of that.
Right.
So, us, because I've got, elderly parents as well. So what does that look like in terms of being able to assist our parents and our loved ones, right? So there's a lot of outside the box thinking now that we normally didn't see. That traditional family where it's a family of, 4 or 3, whatever that is, in just under one roof. It's not like that anymore, because we've got more people in a household now than we had traditionally before.
Right, and it's looking at creative solutions. Tracy Valko, founder of Valko Financial, is joining us this hour to share her wealth of knowledge. After the show today, if you'd like more information about the topics discussed on the show, start your journey at tracyvalko.ca. You can call Tracy 519-745-8019 or email as well, tracy@valkofinancial.ca. So Tracy, the federal government announced last week, or actually a few weeks ago now, that they are planning on lengthening amortization rates to 30 years for first-time home buyers if you're purchasing a new build. Is that going to have a significant impact on the housing market? What's your take on that decision?
I mean, it's a great win if we are having movement in terms of mortgage rules in Canada, when we're looking at helping first-time home buyers enter into the housing market. Last week's announcement from the Minister of Finance, Krista Freeland, on the federal budget clearly indicated that they were focusing on housing initiatives. I think that this change, we haven't seen the 30-year amortization for 12 years now in Canada. I can't believe it's actually been that long. But that goes to show you the challenges that we've been facing, right? Because it was definitely a needed tool to help people with payment shock and also payment management when buying a home, because it's not just about your mortgage and your property taxes. But I think the caveat on this is, one, it's starting not today. It starts August 1st. Yeah. And also the biggest caveat is it's for new builds. So it's great that it's for new construction. And I'm all about policies that help first-time home buyers enter into the housing market. However, I think it should be blanketed across every property, because we have a lot of resale homes coming out that are listed as well. So maybe, there is conversation that potentially this will be adjusted to be blanketed across all. And here's the one thing with new builds, it's great that it is a 30-year amortization. It will help people. But new builds aren't a tomorrow fix, right? New builds it could take 9, 12 months to complete that property. So it's not an immediate fix for people, but it is helping them. When you look at it, and I did a comparison on, if someone was buying a new build, let's say in the Kitchener-Waterloo region for $890,000, from a 25-year amortization to a 30-year amortization, and that's with minimum down payment. So minimum down payment is 7.22%.
Yeah.
Because it's a sliding scale, right? When it's over a purchase price of $500,000, which is very complicated for a lot of people to understand, right? It is. But that is the minimum down payment on that type of purchase price. You're looking at, with the increase of a 30-year amortization, your payment will be reduced by $419, which is a big win.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's a big win. And in terms of qualifying you, when I looked at income, it actually, the amount of income needed to qualify was reduced by about $12,000. So that's a great win, right? And it's great. But here's the thing. The mortgage insurance, which is when you're dealing with down payments less than 20%, realistically in Canada, do not even make up almost 10% of the housing market anymore.
Oh boy.
Because people aren't qualifying on interest rates. So I'm optimistic because I know rates are coming down. I'm optimistic like, hey, we've got the 30-year. We've lobbied for it for a long time, so it's a great win. I think that hopefully we'll see that this program is extended to blanket on every type of purchase home of a first-time home buyer. One of the other initiatives that I wanted to chat about was about they increased the RSPs withdrawal. So traditionally it was the maximum was $35,000 that you could withdraw if you're a first-time home buyer. Now that's been increased to $60,000. And the other change on this is that prior to the budget announcement, you had to start repaying back that RSP within 2 years.
Right.
Now it's been adjusted to 5 years. So you have some breathing room to get adjusted to living in that home, your mortgage expenses, your home expenses, and then you've got 5 years to start that repayment. I think one of my challenges when I look at this is a lot of people have had a hard time saving $60,000 in an RSP.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's other vehicles that you can use to save money. There's the FHSA, there's the TFSA, where you won't have that repayment back like an RSP. So I'm telling a lot of first-time home buyers, use all three, right?
Yeah.
And manage yourself, because you have to remember with an RSP, what you take out of it, because you're getting a tax break on that, you have to actually repay it back.
You do.
So you're going to have monthly payments on that eventually down the road. So it's all about, to me, payment management and life management from every aspect. But those are some of the changes, right, that we saw. And, there's great wins. I think there's still challenges from it, though.
Okay. And I mean, the government's, their aim, they want to make housing more accessible and stabilize those markets. I think the key thing is sometimes maybe it feels like it's spread a little too thin, and you can, like you said, there's a certain part of the population that would benefit from a 30-year amortization. Another part of the population who just happen to have $60,000 in their RSPs and they can draw on that. But it still seems to be, it seems to be sort of little pockets of people that are benefiting, whereas maybe we need a larger look at things, and you've already talked about a couple of these things. The idea of being creative when it comes to housing, whether it is, the one discussion was kind of rebuilding those wartime houses, or building fourplexes, or looking at. And maybe it needs to be people change their view or their idea of what home ownership is. It might not be that white picket fence and a 2-story with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and that whole thing. It's when you break it down, it's that idea of people want to be safe, they want to have a roof over their head, and they want to be able to afford the place that they're living in.
And I think one of the big differences is that people want to be together.
Yes.
A lot more, right? So you're seeing families come together. It's interesting because I saw some first-time home buyers last week. I actually did a first-time home buyer seminar. And the conversations I had with a lot of couples, which was really great to see, was that people were utilizing a lot of the saving tools that are out there for down payments, and very savvy of understanding, RSPs and TFSAs, which I think is amazing. But really looking outside that box in terms of qualifying, that they're already talking to me about mortgage helpers. So that would be in-laws moving in, like parents moving in, having an income suite in the basement. And a lot of the builders are accommodating that when we're looking at the model homes, that you can see that already being built in when you're looking at basements, having, a separate kitchen, a separate bathroom. more of a greater living area to accommodate families. So I think that builders are slowly changing that because they understand that this is the way. Like you said, housing looks different for everyone. I think we have to, in Canada, I wouldn't say, are we spoiled in the sense of housing? I think it's just we grew up in a white picket fence, a family of, 3, 4, 6, whatever that is, but no extra external family members. And we have to look at it differently. In Europe, a lot of families live together in smaller quarters because they're outside a lot more and they're doing more activities. And I think that we have to look at housing differently. The younger generation, definitely when I speak to a lot of young people, living in smaller quarters because they're traveling more, they're experiencing the world not being cash strapped from a mortgage payment, especially with values so high. I mean, let's face it, we're not going to see values come down drastically in Canada.
Right.
We don't have the supply. In fact, part of the new budget announcement is that the Liberals are saying that they're going to be increasing and building homes by 550,000 each year up until 2028. And we were traditionally only building 270,000 units. That's a big initiative on a housing market when we don't even have the trades, let alone the skill set. So there's a lot of initiatives I saw in the federal budget in terms of bringing in, people from other countries to help with, them alerting to this new skill set and new trades that we're going to need in the housing market. But that's a goal. That's not going to be a today solution or tomorrow. So the value of homes, I mean, when you look at it from, I'll go back to G7 countries, we are one of the most expensive housing markets in all the countries. And so we have to look at housing differently now.
Right. And I like that idea of community and spending time with extended family. And you're right, we take these old world ideas and they have been working for some reason, right? A lot of discussion around, the blue zones in the world. Where do people live the best lives and the longest lives and those things? And you would think it could be diet, it could be exercise, those kinds of things. But a lot of times it boils down to that idea of a sense of community and a sense of purpose. And if you have grandparents living with you, helping to look after the kids, or at least maybe not living right in the same space, but they're an arm's length away. They're close, and it's just a different view of looking at the world. And you're right. The government has got a few ideas, but there are some bigger ideas we want to take a look at. Some final tips from Tracy today. 2 words we've heard about a lot in the news lately: capital gains. What do we need to know, Tracy, and why is it such a hot button topic these days?
There's been a lot of changes, I think, in the last week and a half with the federal budget, a lot of mortgage changes. So we're getting inundated with a lot of questions from the community, and rightly so, right? Tax time's coming up, and I know we're going to touch on that. But capital gains, I mean, they did adjust that policy. There is still some gray there. So what I'm going to recommend for sure is make sure you have an accountant and you speak to your accountant about capital gains, because they could look at different ways to be able to help you navigate this. But overall, if you have an investment property that you're not residentially living in, that you're owner occupying in, if you go to sell this property after June 25th, you are going to have to pay, if you do have, let's say, $250,000 worth of capital gains, when you sell it from the time of when you purchased it, the first $250,000 is taxed at 50%.
Boom.
And then if you have where you're, when you sell your home, it's over $250,000 that you've actually gained in equity, and you're going to be taxed 66% over and above that $250,000. Actually, it's 66.7. My apologies. I should put the 0.7 in there.
We'll take it.
But it's a big change, right? And the capital gains isn't just on selling properties. Is if you're a small business owner and you've retained earnings, you're going to be taxed on that, 250 and then above 250. So it's really hindering people from growing investment properties, especially if it's a short-term gain. So if you're buying to flip, not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. If you're an entrepreneur, and they even talked about it, how a lot of businesses are going to look at Canada differently with the tax ramifications that we have. I mean, the government's increased taxes. Why did they increase taxes? A lot of their conversation is they're doing this because of all the housing market initiative that they're doing, and they're trying to solve the housing problem. Well, solve the housing problem, let's just decrease interest rates.
Let's do that.
Let's not tax people enough. So, I mean, it's a difficult conversation to have on capital gains because it was just announced, and there is, I think, a lot of gray that we have to look through. I think this is why they're talking about you'll see more listings come up between now and the third week in June, because people that need to sell will want to sell to make sure that they're cashing in as much equity as they can on their properties. Having said that, looking at vacation properties, especially up north in Ontario, there's double listings now. It's double time from the time that you sell to list than we've seen before. Their values definitely have dropped and they talked about waterfront properties. And a lot of that has to do with, could be this policy, could be where they're talking about, baby boomers needing to make that change and just, it's too much for them. Gaining the capacity of having liquid assets to help family members buy homes or buy a bigger property somewhere else, right? So I think there's a lot of factors. So I think that the cottage country is going to hurt on values a little bit, but it will be corrected, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we need to, like you said, start off with an accountant, get somebody to take a look at it.
Absolutely.
And you need to make sure that you're moving in that right direction. It's tax time as well. How does tax time always impact when it comes to what's going on in the markets and what people need to be paying attention to as well?
Well, I think it's important to filing taxes. You need to have an accountant, and
there
for
you go.
many reasons.
Yeah.
One is they have all the caveats of what the changes are from a tax perspective in Canada, but what you can take advantage of, because there is a lot of programs out there that you can take advantage of, and a lot of people don't know. But one thing is to make sure if you are filing, and you need to file your personal income tax, the deadline is April 30th of this year, which is fast approaching. Yes. And you will have a penalty if you file after that date. So every month that you file late, it's 1% based on the balance, and then it's 5% for the balance that you owe if you don't pay it on April 30th. So you got to keep that in mind. You're paying the government money, right, for not being prepared on your taxes. So make sure you're getting that done. That's the biggest thing. If you're self-employed, that's extended, so it's June 15th that you have to have it in, but you have penalties on your corporation if you file later than that, right? So you want to make sure that you get an accountant. And here's the other biggest thing. If you're looking at getting mortgage financing, the lenders, banks, financial institutions, credit unions wants to see that you're using a chartered accounting firm or accountant, because they want to make sure that you have a professional that's looking at your taxes and you're not doing it on your own. And that's one big thing that I always tell people, because they sometimes have to backtrack because they've been doing it, on their own for a few years, right? So it's important that you do use an accountant so you can take advantage of that, right? But there's tons of different credits that are available. There's grocery rebates that you can get if you're single, or your income is under the middle class that the government has. There's Canadian dental benefits that you can receive as well. There's a first-time home buyer credit that you can get when you buy your first home that you can take advantage of on your taxes. And these are a lot of programs people don't know that are out there to help offset maybe you now, instead of you paying the government, receiving a credit. On average in Canada, the amount that Canadians receive back from the government on their taxes is about $2,200. So listen, anything is better than nothing.
And it's your money.
Exactly. And then it's your money that
back.
you can invest, right? You can put it into an investment platform. So, keeping up to date with your taxes, making sure that you're understanding, it's a daunting, taxes are very daunting, and they're boring to some extent, right? Unless you're really into understanding it. But you do have to take time to understand at a very high level, because you could be saving yourself thousands of dollars and a lot of heartache, right?
And you can't bury your head in the sand and think, oh, it's going to go away. No, it's always going to catch up with you. And I know, I've used an accountant for 15 years, and I think my taxes would be fairly simple to do in some ways, but I trust the expert to do them because, like you said, get another set of eyes on them because there's always that chance that you're going to miss something.
Exactly. And I mean, there's lots of programs out there with taxes where you can get a rebate back if you are building an income suite for multi-generational, they call it multi-generational tax credit.
Yeah.
So this is what you can take advantage of, and people have done those renovations and maybe not even known about
Right.
it. So
Right.
this is why it's so important to speak to an accountant to make sure you're taking advantage of these programs while they're there, because we know programs change.
That's right.
Right?
Right. And you know what? Not all accountants are boring, but maybe what the things that they do. But maybe it's boring in the fact that, you know, it just keeps us away from thinking about it too much. But hey, pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
These days, we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe you can take us through best way right now to navigate a home purchase. What I know they need to talk to you. They need to talk to the experts. What else do they need to be doing?
I think it's one of the most important things is documentation.
Okay.
So really understanding what documentation that we need as mortgage professionals to help navigate your financing, and keeping your documentation clean. And what I mean by that is making sure you are filing your taxes. That's why it's so important when I speak to people at tax time is don't delay it, file it, because you might be on the fence of looking for a property and you find that dream home,
Yeah.
but you haven't filed your taxes, so that's going to set you back.
Right.
Because we need to see that, especially if you're getting overtime or bonuses. We can use those 2-year averages, and that could make or break your financing for best interest rates, or us having to change your financing to the alternative space because you haven't done your taxes or you're behind. It also helps me really understand where you're going with your financing, right? So really having your documentation, understanding what you need. If you do own a property, and you are moving up in terms of your home, making sure you have your mortgage paperwork, your property taxes paid up to date. That's one of the biggest things I see is people are behind on paying their property taxes. So looking at ways to schedule that into a monthly payment so that you're not behind on that, because you have to get that up to date, right?
That's a big hit. That's a big hit if you don't do it every month.
Yeah. So it's understanding that. Now, if you are a first-time home buyer and you've been saving your money in one of these saving platforms that the government has, making sure that you have that documentation, pulling off those statements, that I always say to people, you don't want your down payment messy. And what I mean by that is having it in like 6 or 8 different areas. It's just so much paperwork that you'll need to provide, because the banks and lenders need to see that trail of income, right? Of where you're receiving and where you're putting your money into for that down payment. So, having now like 3 sources of down payment where it's coming from, whether it's a TFSA, a FHSA, an RSP, that's fine, but you want to make sure you've got it accessible so we can see where it's coming from, right? So those are huge things I think are super important. Understanding your credit.
Yeah.
So there's lots of applications that you can put on your phone. Credit Karma is a great one to see where your credit score is on a monthly basis. It'll send you notifications if things are looking wrong or something has changed.
Yeah,
now that score, you have to keep in mind, is not exactly to the point when we do your financing, but it's very close to it. So knowing your credit for sure. I have so many people that we talk to that really don't understand their credit, and they get angry at a phone bill and don't make their phone bill payment, and then that ends up being an R9, which is the worst rating you can get, and then they're wondering, why can't I get best interest rates?
Yeah.
When having that conversation of just, let's talk about, you pay it and you argue it later on.
Tracy, this happens all the time. We run out of time before we run out of things to talk about. That just means you're going to have to come back on the show again.
Well, there you go.
Thanks so much for giving us some of your time today, and it always comes through. Your passion always comes through. Your wealth of knowledge always shines through as well too. So thanks for giving us your time and being here on Ask the Experts. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, if anyone has any questions, we're always here to address.
I love it. Listeners, if you want to chat with Tracy yourself, start your journey, tracyvalko.ca, or give her a call, 519-745-8019. And thanks to you, listeners, for tuning in. You've been listening to Ask the Experts here on City News 570.